Hey folks, Steve here with a very special video for you today. We're going to be playing more GCACW. We're going to be playing more Stonewall Jackson's Way 2 Battles of Bull Run, specifically All Green Alike, and this time we are going to play the biggest campaign for All Green Alike that's in the box, and that is the Virginia campaign. Now, you can see the camera is showing a much broader amount of map than before because the Virginia campaign actually utilizes or can utilize both maps that come in Stonewall Jackson's Way 2. It can also leverage the Here Come the Rebels West map from the Roads to Gettysburg II, or whatever version of Here Come the Rebels map you may have. This is differentiated from the Bull Run campaign, which is the campaign in the book just prior, which is assuming you don't have a Here Come the Rebels map, you just have the self contained game, then you would just play the Bull Run campaign, which could be played on just the North map for Stonewall Jackson's Way. The South map, which I do have set up here, you can see the South map, is optional, and I am choosing to play with that option. So it extends all the way down to Spotsylvania and Orange County in the south, though most of the action of the campaign, at least the parts around Manassas Junction, will still be on the north map. And then what the Virginia campaign allows us to do is include the events that were going on up north in the valley, where Patterson was, potentially going to look to press against Johnston's forces, and the ideal U.S. Army situation would be keeping Johnston's rebels from getting down to support Beauregard. And in this campaign, you can potentially get into that mode. Now you'll notice I've got some what's all this about? I'm using some yarn that I stole from my wife to kind of mark out certain areas of the map, because let me tell you, the rules and the specificity of things definitely are dialed up here for this campaign to make sure that the right sequence of events can occur, the right restrictions are in place, and it means that certain hexes, certain rows of hexes, either can't be crossed, or if they're crossed, there's this X consequence. And to help remind myself that that's the case, I put these bits of string, yarn rather, across those hex rows or lines to help keep me playing the game legally, and to help my brain kind of process what's supposed to be happening up there. And we'll take a closer look at that here soon. Just like what do those pieces of yarn actually mean? What is that all about? I also have a number of these turn reminder chits out that really just signify either that unit is allowed to start moving after that turn or on that turn, or there's something in the rules that's worth looking at, special rules for the scenario that should be looked at to confirm the situation. I don't know if it's this campaign in particular that I am choosing to play the most bulked up version of this, so it's self-inflicted, but it does feel like there's just a lot more rules weight, and GCACW, the basic operations of the unit activations and what they need to do, what they can do, especially when you're playing a basic game scenario, it is really trivially easy to comprehend. It's really not complicated at all, and that is a sure positive for the system. The systems work pretty cleanly, and as you look to play a campaign game like this, the specific Virginia campaign, you have to do a couple of things. You have to be on top of the basic rules, just the rule book, right? I was using the 1.5 rule book to know how the basic game works. Then you're going to read a couple pages of rules for All Green Alike, and I saw an unboxing video from the Player's Aid recently. It was kind of well timed that they did that as I was starting this series. That saying like, oh well, it's just a few extra pages of rules. Well, no, it's not actually. It's a couple more pages of rules for the module base scenarios that you have to include, and that includes the rules like the command range is only 2 hexes instead of 3, or you can only assault, or I'm sorry, you can only attack with the first unit activated in a group formation, and none of that's too difficult. But when you get to the advanced game rules, that does add, I want to say it was like 6, 7, or 8 pages of additional rules to lay on top of everything else that we've laid on top of. Which, again, for me and the types of games that I do play, like World in Flames and other stuff, like it shouldn't be that much more, and it's really not. But I will point out that in the preparation for this scenario in particular, and because I am choosing to play it this way, I had to jump through some extra hoops. And I think if you're totally new to a series, you should just know that yes, you're going to have to take a little bit more time to really sit down and process these rules and understand what is supposed to be happening. Because there's typically lots of restrictions that you have to watch out for, like the ones that matter for these pieces of yarn I put on the map. You could handle this any other way. You could simply put some markers down or something. I'm using yarn because I can kind of mold it to terrain if I had to. Just useful to do that. But these restrictions can kind of catch you, and then it's also because I'm deciding to play with the South map, that further modifies the existing advanced rules, and then the Virginia campaign specific special rules are on top of that. So it's one of those situations where if you're going to build up to play this Virginia campaign, you definitely want to make sure you are carefully absorbing these rules. Each one individually maybe is not a big deal, but it is important to keep in mind how things are supposed to operate. And I do expect that in other campaign games for other games in the series or other modules, that much of the advanced game rules are either similar or pretty close to one another. And so what I learn here, or what I've adapted myself here, should pay off dividends when I go to play, the Stonewall Jackson's Way module or the Roads to Gettysburg module, or whatever I'm going to play in the future. Some of this stuff should transfer okay, but it was definitely a step up in between my last video and this one to really sit there and make sure I'm getting, like, why is the rule that way? What is that representing? What could I get wrong if I played it incorrectly? So there's just a lot of stuff related to that, that I want to indicate and have you watch out for. So this Virginia campaign itself is 14 turns. So we're going to be playing from July 15th to July 28th, basically. So you're really talking, 2 weeks, each turn being a day, 2 weeks of operations. At the very beginning of the scenario, there are restrictions in place that basically, on turn one, on day one, only units up here can really do anything up there in the valley. And that's going to represent Patterson kind of inching his way further south, Johnston deciding, what, if anything, he's really going to do here to try to either fend off the U.S. Army forces, try to take Harper's Ferry, or disrupt their deal before they start heading south. In terms of victory points, I don't know that there's a strong incentive for Johnston to stick around and try to do that. You can get some victory points for getting control of Berkeley and Jefferson County up there in the valley, but the opportunity cost, all the total victory points that you could maybe get up there, while not nothing, imperils the rest of the map. And so, the rebels could perform, well in the valley, or reasonably well in the valley, and lose the rest of the scenario down in Prince William County around Manassas Junction. And so I don't think, in terms of the strategy of my playthrough, I don't see me playing as the rebels going to lead to anything but Johnston, just as soon as he reasonably can, starting to move to support Beauregard. That's my thought process on it. On turn two, there is the ability for all units to move, activate, entrench, except for Confederate units in the Potomac District, which is Beauregard's units, and the cavalry units that are nearby. But if Union units move within 3 hexes of any of these unit startup hexes, the unit in that hex may activate and entrench freely. So what's going to happen on day 2 is right over here. We are going to have the bulk of the U.S. Army divisions start to creep onto the map when the U.S. player has initiative to activate them. So they don't start on map. The only U.S. forces that start on the map are up in the valley. Right over here, where D.C. and Alexandria is where the U.S. forces actually are. So they will start to activate by division and kind of come out of here and can start to move. If they get close to Fairfax Courthouse, where there's a decent little stack of uh, rebel troops there, those rebel troops can activate. So as you get near them as the Union, those rebel troops can activate, can respond, can functionally retreat. But these units back here can't on turn 2. And then you get to turn 3, where basically everybody can operate and act except for this one lonely rebel troop up there at Leesburg. And then on turn 4, generally everybody is good to go to activate. So there's this sort of slow crawl, slow momentum build up to all the big action happening. Um, and by then, around turns 5 and 6, is probably around the time we should be expecting Johnston to have figured something out about, like, is he getting down there in time to support? And so lots of different ways you could take this. You can have the rebel forces try to stall in Fairfax County, um, or simply fall back like they historically did, try to get behind Bull Run and hope to get the right activations on a fresh day to entrench and entrench and entrench, keeping in mind that in this 1861 campaign, you only entrench at the end of a day. You don't get to entrench as an action. So there's definitely some constraints in terms of what everybody can do, in addition to all the other rules that we've seen up to this point. That diagonal line here, and I'll just move the camera a little bit so you can see this a bit better. That diagonal line, from our perspective, is a rebel unit restriction. So Johnston's forces can't actually go across that diagonal line right away for turns 1 through 3. So we can't just immediately say we're getting the heck out of the valley and start heading to Manassas Junction. We actually have to stick around for 3 turns. They also can't go over the Potomac River. So they're really locked into this, like, cheese wedge up here to operate and to fight Patterson's forces if they so choose. Rebel units can't go into Maryland east, very far east of there, functionally. And yeah, so there's a certain degree of, like, what do you want to do for those 3 turns with Johnston's forces, if anything? Do you try to wallop the Union while you can? That's certainly one option. If you can pull off some great combats and really put Patterson's forces into a panic state, that could be worth some victory points. But you definitely want to be sticking really close to this diagonal line of hexes that I've marked out here, because you eventually need to be marching east. And the historical path that I believe they took is that they had come back down this way. They came to Paris, at least according to the game's history notes, and then made their way down to Piedmont Depot, where they got on the rail line. So that important rail line that we've seen in other scenarios, or in the previous scenario, which was the Battle of Bull Run itself. This rail line is very important. That's the rail line that's going to get them down to Beauregard. So they've got to think through that, right? If all of a sudden They're operating way up here. Well, it's going to take them that much more effort to try to get down there. Um, a lot more effort to try to get down there. And, by the time if they take too long, by the time they get down there, the river line of Bull Run may already be breached. And in that case, they're trying to keep them from marching down the railway to Culpeper, right? So that's the timing challenge for the rebels. They've got to do a retreat. They've got to like situate themselves, maybe try to use their cavalry to delay the Union, and then hope to have a strong defensive line, uh, here as they did historically, and defeat the U.S. forces that way, right? Like that's the historical path to victory. We would certainly want to do that. For the United States, here's the funny thing. So this scenario has some random mechanic at the very beginning where you roll a die for Patterson, and he's either going to be timid, cautious, or aggressive. Now, if he ends up being cautious or aggressive based on a die roll, you lose some victory points as the Union. It's like, for Patterson to be more active than he could be. That's a good thing, maybe, right? But you sort of pay it off with some victory point penalties. But it's not huge. So aggressive, which requires a roll of 6 on the die roll at the beginning of the game. Aggressive means that Patterson can take his forces wherever and whenever he wants up there in the valley, and he can choose to press upon Johnston's forces right away if he so chooses. And that for sure to me feels like the best thing you could hope for, because I think the counterfactual opportunity that the Union is looking for here is for Patterson to disrupt Johnston to greater effect and keep Johnston from joining up with Beauregard and allow the forces of McDowell to win the day via the numerical superiority and divisional organizations that the U.S. Army has. That's kind of like the clear line of a strategic way to win this scenario. But it's not likely that Patterson's going to be aggressive. He's much more likely to be timid. That's a 1 through 3 die roll. And if he's timid, he can never, ever, right? No units of the Pennsylvania District, that's the one that Patterson controls, may move off of the Here Come the Rebels West map. So they're always on the most northern map that we have set out today. And they can't move into row XX30 on that map or attack the hexes near Winchester or Winchester itself for the whole game. And that first row, that XX30, is this first horizontal or topmost horizontal yarn line. So you can imagine if we roll a 3, then basically at most all Patterson's going to do is try to hold Berkeley and Jefferson County, protect Harper's Ferry and Sandy Hook, where a depot is going to be deployed there. That's to keep the rebels from getting a certain degree of victory points, but they can never come down here and attack, and they can't really go further south here. A heavy restriction, awful restriction. I assume that is intended to be the historical result, because Patterson really didn't pressure Johnston. So that's kind of rough, right? And that kind of defeats the purpose of even having Patterson here. And then the final option is cautious. So cautious is the most complicated one to adjudicate, and so it's a little annoying trying to parse the situation. So if Patterson is cautious, then we follow that same rule. That first horizontal line, we can't cross it right away. We are stuck operating in those northern parts of the map functionally. But the second day, so basically the second turn, after there are less than 15 manpower of rebels north of row XX03, on the Stonewall Jackson North map, then you can start to move closer, basically. So that that counting threshold is this second yarn, the southern yarn line, I guess I should call it. So we want to keep a decent count of the Confederate manpower that exists north of that yarn line, basically. So as long as there's more, uh, 15 or more manpower, Patterson's not going to be able to really push forward, unfortunately. And what this does is it still gives the rebels the opportunity to choose when and how they're going to start to withdraw forces to head towards Beauregard. So they get, the first day that there's less than 15, you still can't penetrate that line. The second day, you are. Um, at that point, uh, yeah, at that point, all restrictions on Patterson are removed except that Patterson's units may not enter Warren County. I'm not going to pronounce this right, guys. I'm sorry. I'm not from Virginia or even Maryland. Uh, Fauquier County. Oh gosh, someone tell me how to pronounce that. Or Prince William County, west of column 32XX. So what that means is when we look at Warren County, well, Warren County is here. The Fauquier County is here, basically. It's a pretty big county, but it's right over here. And then Prince William, which is over here and includes the Manassas area. So you can go into Winchester at that point. You can enter Frederick County, but you can't go into Warren County or Fauquier County or Prince William County uh, in the west part of the map. Functionally, it's like right here west. Like you can't doggedly pursue Johnston. So as Johnston begins to pull back, withdraw, and head to Manassas Junction, you can move into Winchester at that point, but you can't pursue Johnston and attack him from behind, basically. Now that would be in place. That restriction uh, on the second day after that occurs, then all restrictions are removed. So basically, you're giving, even after you can penetrate uh, that northern yarn line, after the rebels have already gone south of the South Yarn line, they basically still get 2 days of travel before you can pursue them, if you're going to pursue them at all. So I don't know that being cautious is that different than timid, other than if you're cautious, you still have the opportunity to get into Winchester as the U.S. And you can still elect to operate in the valley, and I think there's still value in doing that. In the off chance that maybe the Union plugs up some holes over here and Johnston gets isolated, then he can maybe be surrounded after Patterson can pursue or something like that. I don't know how valid that's going to be. I also think supply is going to be a big deal there, which is something we've not talked about. So that's kind of a key thing that we need to operate against. It's special rules that are very explicit, but very carefully. Like, you have to really read them and understand the pros and cons of any action at the very beginning of the scenario up in the valley. Tricky stuff. Um, Tricky stuff. Uh, so let's do talk about supply for a second. I don't intend to talk through every deep advanced game mechanic here, but supply is going to be pretty important. There are a couple of depots. There's a depot in Hagerstown. There will eventually be a depot in Sandy Hook there at the center of the map. There's a default depot here, which is technically off map, providing supply to Union forces entering Fairfax. And then you have a depot in Manassas Junction, and then there's a depot actually further south in Fredericksburg on the south map. You only count supply on uh, July 19th and July 24th. And, basically you need to be within so far of what is it? A unit is in supply if during the supply phase it can trace a continuous path of road, pike, or railroad hexes no more than 25 hexes in length for Union units, or 15 hexes in length for Confederate units to a friendly depot. And then even, really the depot for the Confederates have to be able to trace um, off to a particular location. But so something to keep in mind with that. If you find that a unit is out of supply, you can forage, which basically gives them a second chance, a random chance to stay in supply. Um, if you are out of supply, then you're going to suffer penalties during the recovery phase and can potentially also have automatic manpower loss if you're out of supply, twice in a row, basically. Um, but you only check supply twice, basically. So I'm not sure how much supply is really going to matter. I've heard people on the Facebook group for GCACW mention, like, oh yeah, well the supply really limits your ability to operate, but I don't think that's true. I think it can, but you've really got to suffer being out of supply twice for it to matter. At which point, um, you're pretty deep in the scenario by then, and should have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen in the game for that. Um, so I don't know, something we'll keep an eye on, and we'll certainly look to create situations where units are out of supply. Can definitely do some practice counts, right? And say, like, well, if we're going to count from Hagerstown, 25 hexes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Maybe, if you're taking that route, and this route wouldn't be too dissimilar coming down this pike, you're getting pretty far down the valley, but not quite far enough. So you're going to have to deal with foraging. Fortunately, for those forces operating in the valley has better foraging capability. So it's really not that big of a concern, I think, in my mind, of just, is supply really going to kill us in this scenario? No. I think it's something we'll need to pay attention to, but that's kind of the main thing. The one problem that the Union is going to have is that they have the 3-month enlistment problem, where on just about every turn, starting on the 19th through to the end of the game, um, some in the Pennsylvania district, some in the northeastern Virginia district, our Potomac forces and Pennsylvania forces, are going to have to lose manpower automatically. This is men that are leaving because their enlistments are up. All told, it's a fair amount of manpower that's lost. So there's a timer ticking for both Patterson and McDowell's forces to make progress where they can, because they're going to lose some men over time. Now, there's an optional rule that is for compensating manpower loss. I think if you don't play with this optional rule, um, you're like you're imbalancing the game in favor of the rebels, because the compensating manpower loss, while it takes a little bit of extra paperwork, um, actually makes total logical sense, and to do otherwise seems really silly to me. So what it is like, okay, if you take manpower losses, whether from combat or whatever, um, some of those are going to count against those that would be uh, withdrawn from the 3-month enlistment ending. That makes sense, right? Like, what to do otherwise would to double penalize the Union. You would lose manpower from deaths, and then have and without this optional rule, it kind of automatically assumes that any losses on your forces are from men that don't have the 3-month enlistment, and then you get dinged for the 3-month enlistment ending, and you're losing even more manpower, right? And that is bonkers. So this optional rule, which to me, like you really ought to play with it because otherwise it doesn't, it seems silly not to. Basically, you get a prorated thing where if you've taken some losses, that's factored in to the manpower that you're going to lose when you lose it. So because that it kind of combines that idea like, okay, some of the men that died in combat or whatever would have been some of the men that would leave when their enlistment was up. So it makes a whole lot more sense to play with that optional rule. I don't mind the extra paperwork to do something that makes much more logical sense than the adverse. So I will be playing with that, compensating for manpower optional rule. Um, Other big thing is while previous scenarios dealt with um, control of specific hexes, and we still kind of have to worry about that to a certain degree. I still have my handy dandy colored bingo chits out here. Control of counties is actually something we need to concern ourselves with. The fastest way to explain this is that based on territory, based on the county, it's either default, uh, Union or default rebel control. Um, and you can imagine like, okay, if it's in Virginia, it's going to be default rebel control. If it's in an area that is in Maryland or various other places, it's default, uh, United States control. And if you want to change that, what you need to do is have at least two manpower worth of a unit in the county seat. So Warrenton is the county seat for Fauquier County, and it's got a red star here, so that kind of indicates it's the county seat, county capital, however you want to look at it. You need to have two manpower there, and then you need to have like 10 manpower at large in the county itself. So you could pile all of that in the county. More likely, maybe you'll have a garrison in the county seat, and then you've got various other units in the area. And these counties are actually pretty big, so it's just as long as you've got enough forces in occupation of that county and in the county seat, you control it. But that occupation is only valid for as long as you meet that criteria. So there is no, like, I don't know, in a strategic game, you might like plop a political control marker down and now you just control that county forevermore while it's vacant of on map units. Strategic level game, that's a different level of abstraction in simulation. Here you have to maintain control. Um, and if you deprive or gain control of a county, that means that the opposing side can't use the railroads there. And so, because the rebels are the only ones who get to use rail movement, as the Union makes progress and takes control of counties, if they do, then it's going to make it harder for the rebels to operate there, and they can't get reinforcements railed in functionally. So what we would expect to happen maybe is, and this was actually reflected in our an end to innocence scenario, as the Union comes over into Fairfax County. Fairfax is controlled by the rebels by default. When the Union has folks in Fairfax Courthouse, which is the county seat, and has enough forces in Fairfax in general, and Fairfax is a pretty big county too, that will be enough to control Fairfax. And if you remember back, or if you want to flick back over to the end of Innocence scenario that we played, that scenario starts with some weaker backup Union forces, some regiments sitting in several of these locations over here. They were functionally maintaining control of the county. And so where this kind of breaks out is like, maintaining control of Fairfax, coming into Prince William, where Manassas Junction is the seat of Prince William County. If you're pushing the rebels out of Prince William County, you might control that, and then that opens it up to moving into Fauquier County and Warrenton, and so on and so forth. Control of counties will be worth victory points, so certainly not just a mad scramble to win the battle, but to also make sure that the lines behind the Union Army are keeping control of some of these counties as they move forward. That's something we're going to want to do, get the victory points for that. Now, the final big special rule that's worth calling out for the advanced scenario that's going to really matter for us in great effect. Besides, there are some reinforcements. That's what these guys are. After so many turns, we'll be able to start rolling to bring these reinforcements in. These are those weaker regiments or brigades that may come onto the map. Um, the big thing here is morale. So on the morale track, we have panic levels for all the forces, and then and we're doubled up here, and then the morale, which starts at 0. That's not like your morale is not 0, meaning you don't have morale. It's how many morale hits have you taken is kind of the way to look at that. So each army, or we'll say district in this case, however you want to look at it, forces off near the valley are the Shenandoah forces. Those who are operating over here are the Potomac forces. And whenever you have a unit in that region retreat, route, or whatever, where it is clear you have lost an engagement, you're going to increase the morale marker for that force by the manpower that retreated. So let's say a brigade of 5 manpower was forced to retreat. You would take, and say this is happening somewhere in Fairfax or Prince William County. You would take the morale marker and increase it by 5 on the track. At the end of each day, you move the marker down to half its value. So if our morale marker was at 8, it would go down to 4, this, that, and the other. So there's a little bit of like your morale gets hit when your forces start to lose, but your morale starts to recover. What really matters is if you take enough morale hits in a single day that the morale marker meets or exceeds on the chart the panic marker for uh, that force. So, coming up to 20 for Shenandoah or 25, 35 for the Potomac areas of operation. When you exceed that, you'll end up doing some additional die rolls, but the end result that could occur there is that your army panics. Having your enemy's army panic is worth victory points. An army that is panicked will also perform less well in combat and just in general. And so, if you can drive your forces, your enemy's morale to panic, that's a huge way to win the battle. And I think the historical narrative here would be that the rebel army forced the Army of the Potomac, or the Potomac forces, however you want to categorize that, to panic. And so they not only were defeated from the counterattacks and the engagements around Bull Run, but that the whole army went to rout and panicked and that sort of thing. I think that's the way to consider that. This panic mechanic, I believe, is only in this all green alike module. I'm not sure if it's in any others, but it is at least in this one, and adds a little bit of an extra oomph to the scenario. So while the armies are still a bit oddball, they're green, your organization ranges, command ranges are weakened, your ability to attack on a leader activation is limited. You also have this, flighty panic potential, and it actually incentivizes both sides to look to do like a great big prepared attack. And so what I mean by that is like, yeah, sure, like you continuing to force your opponent back, performing very well, and tactically doing what you need to do. What you may want to do, if it looks like you're in a good position, is kind of take several actions or a day to kind of prepare for a big attack assault series of actions to all at once drive your opponent's morale up to panic. Because if you do it piecemeal every day, each day they have a chance to recover morale. They're not taking that big punch to the face all at once. But if that big punch to the face happens all in one big day, and let's say if the panic for the rebel Potomac is 25, and you manage to make 5 brigades of 5 manpower all retreat, um, in a given day, like that's going to be the hot meal ticket. That's what you want to be achieving. The one other special piece of this is as Johnston's forces move from the valley to the Potomac area, the panic limit for the Potomac forces of the rebels will increase. So it's sort of a percentage of total manpower in the theater. So when those units change theater, that will eventually uh, kind of decrease the likelihood um, of the rebel Potomac Army from panicking. So there's that. If we're really lucky as a Union and we swing through here and we manage to get a really good day, maybe before Johnston's been able to make his transfer over to Beauregard, that's kind of the best time we could hope to panic Beauregard's forces. But that's all going to be playing it by ear at that point. So there's a lot of different things that are at play here, and we haven't even really talked about the railroads being destroyed. There's things like that. There are ferries in certain hexes that could be destroyed. Um, that takes effort, that takes certain degrees of manpower to do it, and it can affect the progress of the Union by and large as they try to make headway either in the Valley or the Potomac area. So there's a lot of explanation here, right? It has taken me a lot of extra time, personal time, reading and reviewing the rules and just trying to understand like what's the deal. Um, but I do expect that this campaign will be a very interesting one. I think there's going to be a lot to chew on as we go to play it. It's just going to be a lot of mental energy on my part figuring this out. I could definitely see where this being an opposed campaign would be less mental fatigue because you're just going to focus on your forces. I'm going to be playing against myself. So I'm going to have to really think through all the permutations of all the things going on all the time for both sides as the situation evolves. But I'm really glad that I did play the an end to innocence scenario because that gives me a very good sense of what to expect when the critical part of the campaign starts to shake out here around Manassas Junction. Also helps that I played across the Potomac because I'm already familiar with that sort of northern part of the valley um, area of the map, though the forces there are a little bit different. The situation's a little bit different from that across the Potomac scenario. I at least kind of know the terrain already and I know what to expect there. So I think I've done everything I could do to prepare well for this specific campaign by playing those two other ones and having a sense of how all this should operate. I should mention this video is getting long, folks. It's a long introduction, but I think it's needed for this complex of a scenario to set up. In previous scenarios, I never felt like I could afford or really had the gumption to try to do like a grand assault or even really an assault. So to do an assault requires that multiple units be in the same hex. That means that you've had to take the additional time in activating them and getting enough movement points that wherever you want to be, those units all stack together. And because of the movement penalty, to move into a existing occupied hex can be a bit painful. It has so far seemed hard to get multiple units of the same division or whatever in the same hex. I usually wanted to create a better flank position than to concentrate manpower in a single point. But that's how you would do an assault. You sort of, a random chance to see how many units in that hex could be part of the assault, but this is where you get the multiple unit attacks. So you could have, 2 units of 5 manpower together potentially do an assault and be attacking with 10 manpower instead of 5. Or, the usual maximum is whatever's in that single unit that's activated. So that's your chance to really get much bigger odds for a combat. A grand assault requires your district leader to be nearby or your army leader nearby, depending on the scenario and module. But that would allow you to do a multi-hex assault, so not just the units in one hex, but also units that are adjacent to the defender, whether that's maybe on the opposite side of them as a concentric attack, or just adjacent. But that's your opportunity to get even more units, more manpower into the combat without having to move them a hex. They just have to be nearby. And that's where you can get these really big combats that can really force a situation against defensive terrain or a hex that has a lot of defenders built up in it. And I could definitely see in the End to Innocence where, um, maybe like on this hex, Union forces here, Union forces here, could have done a grand assault to get over that river. We just ended up not doing it, and not because I forgot about the mechanic, but just I had a lot of other opportunities that I took instead with my activations and ended up paying off. I outflanked rather than ordered a big frontal assault. But that's something that's a toolbox, that's a tool in the toolbox rather, that I haven't utilized yet, but I'll certainly be looking for opportunities to do so in the campaign because I think we're going to have a lot more latitude in activations and turns to set up something like that. And I should say I do like the mechanic because it makes me think about um, these situations in some of the battles that happened in the war where you would have wanted to rally all the troops to make this grand assault, but the assault doesn't go as expected, and that's because that die roll that determines how many units get involved in the assault could go badly for you, and you end up having to assault with only one division or brigade or whatever you were going to do, as opposed to the multiple that you really wanted to. So it's an interesting gamble of, are we going to try this frontal assault? It might actually go south. We only manage to attack with one component of our force, and they get forced to retreat before the other forces kind of come forward. I guess that's how that should be interpreted. So, or something like that, something along those lines. So, I've got to watch out for that. I've not talked about assaults or grand assaults in the previous videos because we just didn't do it. I need to think about how to make use of that here. So anyway, guys, that's a 46-minute introduction for a campaign. Um, a lot of map coverage, plenty of units to operate with. Not a huge number of units, but still pretty darn sizable. And it's going to take some time to play through this. Each turn is going to take a lot of time because of all the different options. I could be switching back and forth between the fronts with my activations and focusing on one area or the next. All these units can go up to 4 fatigue. I may not want to do that, but every unit could be going more than once each turn. So it's going to take time to kind of work my way through this. I suspect it's going to be multiple videos. I think I'm going to aim to do maybe a few turns, so a few days, game days, turns per video. So maybe we're going to end up with 3 or 4 videos each with, I don't know, 4 turns worth. And I'm not going to be able to show each and every move in great detail because of that. So if you're used to my video styles, I will eventually just be moving at a fast pace, not showing a lot on camera. I'm just showing the results of different actions or the result of a turn. I'm definitely going to be in that mode of operation for this campaign, but there's going to be a lot of commentary along the way to kind of flesh out what's happening. So with all that said, I hope this video was interesting. Very long, lot to talk through, but that should leave more time in the later videos for just the actual session reporting, and we'll see where it goes. When I finish with this series, I may do a sort of like mini review or maybe not even a review of the module to kind of talk about thoughts at the end of all things, and then we'll be moving on to other stuff, and we'll certainly return to GCACW in the near future. So thanks for watching, folks. Catch you in the next video when we start the campaign off proper. Until then, take care. Keep on gaming.